All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Martha Alter Hines. I'm here with Chris Skidmore, which is awesome. We haven't officially done a video together in a while, I guess.
Yeah, it has been a little while.
Yeah. So some of you, there are a lot of new people to this YouTube channel. So if you don't know Chris, I'll just say most of you do know Chris because we've done a lot together and we collaborate a lot. But Chris is an astrologer, a psychotherapist, a craniosacral therapist, all things that I am or have been as well, and also has huge deep knowledge about mythology and a very soul centered approach to mythology, specifically Greek mythology. And um yeah, so our conversations tend to be really beautiful and flowing and in that realm of things. And if you're not familiar with Chris's podcast, I just want to say up front, highly recommend it. It's called On the Soul's Terms. I'll put the link with this video. But definitely go check that out if you are resonating with what we are talking about today. So what we're going to talk about, it's probably, again, going to weave in a lot of different things, but on a basic level, we're going to talk about this moment that we're in, which is we're recording this on, for me, October 15th. For Chris, it's October 16th. We're on different parts of the world. And 2024. And so in just over a month, Pluto is going to be entering Aquarius. And there's so much going on with that entrance. And so we're going to probably be weaving in the Mars journey and Pandora, maybe, and Pan. And yeah. And so I think maybe we can start with Chris is just when you drop into this moment in time that we're in October 2024 and moving forward, what's really here for you in your soul, in your feeling of the world and life? That's a really big question.
It is a big question. Hi, Martha, and hi, everybody. And hi, little cat
Thoughts.
in the background. Um, that's really cute. Um, that's interesting timing. So the what's here for me at the moment is just this like increased tension. Just as you asked the question, I'm like, yeah, October 2024, where are we? And we're in this kind of like the amplification of the tension of things. And so just before getting on, we were talking about all these different things and sort of like putting a lot of those stones on the pathway for the moonlight to pick up kind of. So for the audience, you would have just seen a blip in the Matrix. And was that the same black cat? I've just learned that the black cat's name is Box.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of Pandora-ness and an unusual moment for Box to come in, jump on Martha's couch and just start meowing incessantly in the
Constantly. Yeah.
background.
Wouldn't stop.
So that helps me to kind of get that interruptions in the usual interruptions in the status quo, right? Interruptions in the usual flow of things. It's probably to be welcomed at this time, right? It's probably to be welcomed at this time because the status quo is stuck and sticky, And I think as we move into this period, it's a strange time. It's a tense time, and then some of that tension can sort of like pull you apart. Like that's the risk of a time like this, and we can be pulled apart, and we can become almost in that tension. We become like regressed beings and very tribal and very like my corner versus your corner, like we're in a boxing match, and we go back to our corner and like very suspiciously look over the other way. And I think that's the real risk of this time. And ever since I first pondered you know, whenever 2 years ago, really, when you first start to look at like, okay, Pluto really is coming up to Aquarius now, right? Like, because there's a long time of like, yeah, it's so far in the future. 2023, 2024 felt so far away. Now we're like in it. And the image that I got was the two stories that are represented of abductions from Aquarius and from Pluto. The Pluto one is obvious, and everybody that knows a little bit of mythology linked with astrology would know that Pluto, god of the underworld or Hades, one of his most famous stories is that he comes up from the underworld in his golden chariot with 4 black horses guiding his way. He comes up from a sort of earthquake and a shattering, like life-shattering moment. And he grabs Persephone, which feels like all of us, because anybody that's been in a Pluto transit, which is all of us, have gone through the experience of being snatched from one world and taken to another, and snatches her and takes her down. So it's an abduction down into the underworld. So that's the story of, that's one of the Pluto stories, right? And it's one that we go back to, of the feeling of being taken out of this world and taken down. So it's a descent story. In the old language, they used to say katabasis, which is the journey down or a descent, which we also know from shamanic sort of traditions that is a necessity of the sort of cocoon butterfly process, right? Like we have to go down into some kind of like deep underworld process and then be reborn into something else. And it's always something about ritual. It was the Eleusinian mysteries were based on that throughout the ancient world, a 9-day ritual going down and then coming back renewed and refreshed, actually, kind of like available for life in a much different and much newer, much more beautiful way because you went down. So that's why we can't ever stop that story there just when the abduction happens, because there's more. You know, Persephone, when she comes back, is queen. She also becomes the triple goddess, which means she's available to the underworld, the upper world, and the middle world of in-betweens, right? So that's the nature of that. It points to kind of the sorceress, and it points to, you know, magic. It points to some of the things we'll talk about today with Cancer, actually, especially Mars and Cancer. So it talks about all that. Now, so that's the abduction down, the descent. Aquarius, the actual constellation of Aquarius, is the character of Ganymede, and Ganymede is referenced in the myth to Aphrodite. So this is the goddess of truth, beauty, love, all of those things. And for Ganymede, he's wandering in the world much like Persephone. He's wandering in the world. He's the prince of Troy, right? Just like, you know, so he's high-born, just like Persephone's high-born. She's the daughter of Demeter. This is the son of the king of Troy, Tros. And one day, Zeus, so not Hades, not the Zeus of the underworld, which is Hades, the Zeus of the upper world. So we can already get the sense of like these really are, they match each other quite well. Zeus sends down an eagle, the Aquila, sends down that eagle because he takes the fancy, or he enjoys the look of Ganymede, just like pretty youth. He feels like this would be someone that would be good to have in the upper world, on Mount Olympus. So he sends down an eagle, and the eagle just comes and snatches him and takes him up into the sky to eventually land him in Mount Olympus and grant him immortality in Mount Olympus. And as an immortal, he now becomes cupbearer of the gods, which means, in a sense, he gets to know the secrets, because there's something about the cupbearer as an archetypal entity, that cupbearer isn't himself in a position of any power or authority, but because he's around and pouring wine for all of the gods and the powerful people, he gets to know what they talk about. He gets to know the sort of like the essence of what it is to be on Mount Olympus. He's around for all of those secrets of the upper world. So he's snatched and taken up. Now Tros is left behind, and he's devastated, much as Demeter was left behind and she's devastated. But the two processes put side by side are very interesting because they're different forms of grief. Actually, Tros is just frozen. He doesn't process it at all. And Demeter does the exact opposite, where she goes through the entirety of like all the phases of grief plus, right? Like, I mean, that myth shows grief lived out in its most beautiful form. Actually, it's why it was one of the great hymns of the ancient world, and it was turned into this ritual of 9-day process, and it went right into the Christian era, right up until about the 6th century. It was still being practiced widespread, and I imagine it's still being practiced today somewhere by some people, because things like that are too archetypal to disappear. But you see the difference in grieving process. But the main thing I want to talk about today is that split between of the two abductions. That to me is the central symbol. It has been for me anyway. It's what occurred to me early on looking at this, of one abduction taking you to the upper world and one abduction taking you to the underworld, and that extreme tension that can happen between the two of those things, which in a way gives us one of the central themes of what we want to talk about today, of hope and despair, or hope as it's left in Pandora's box, or jar as it is, but box in the name of your cat. So I guess there's my opening monologue.
Thank you. Well, and then just to give people the astrological context of why did this whole thing of Pandora even enter my mind, your mind? Because I was looking at the Pluto Mars dance, which I think we're going to talk about also today. And I so Mars currently is in Cancer. It's going to, Mars is currently in Cancer. It's going to enter Leo, and it's going to go up to 6 degrees of Leo, I think on December 5th, 2024-ish. It's going to go retrograde at 6 degrees of Leo. It's going to go back into Cancer, and it'll be in Cancer again for months and months and months. So for a total of maybe 8 months, with this little blip in Leo, Mars is going to be in Cancer. So it's a really long time of Mars being in Cancer. So that was originally what I was looking at. But what I noticed was that, of course, when Mars is doing that dance, it's going to be opposing Pluto a total of 3 times. The first time being just before Pluto enters Aquarius, and then the 2 other times being once Mars is in Leo, and Pluto has entered Aquarius. Okay. But then when I was looking at that, I went, oh my God, wait a second. Pandora is doing the same thing, the asteroid Pandora. And I was like, this is so weird. So then I tracked the whole Pandora journey. She also was in Cancer, opposed Pluto, now is in Leo, is going to go retrograde at about, I can look at the exact dates if we want them, but at like 12-ish Leo. She's going to go further into Leo than Mars. But she also is, of course, then opposing Pluto once before Pluto enters Aquarius and twice after Pluto is in Aquarius. And the third time that Mars and Pandora are going to oppose Pluto will be when they're conjunct. Both in Leo opposing Pluto.
Wow.
So I was like, what is that? This is, what does Pandora have to say? So go, because we can talk about this for a long time, but start off.
So I mean, there's so much there to sort of tease out, I guess. So if we look at those 2 abductions and then we bring in the Pandora story, like, I think it might be nice for a second here just to bring it in as it is in Greek mythology, usually told by Hesiod. So it has an edginess to it. And this story can easily be taken politically, can be taken as a misogynist story. It can be taken as that it can be taken to say things that maybe it was saying at the time, or maybe it was not saying at the time, because we can't help but put our modern lens on old stories. But I think what I'd like to do is like help the story just to be able to tell itself through us. And I'd like to give a little perspective on what I see this story as more of a fairy tale component to it, and what happens in fairy tales. And I'll just say something about that first, that in fairy tales, and this is from Marie-Louise France, who's really the master of fairy tales. I mean, she's one of the greats. But she talks about how fairy tales have almost a mathematical component to them, and they tend to work in these sets of four. And if you have a fairy tale, like I was talking to you before about the three feathers, the fairy tale, where there's a king and three sons, then what you have is an off-balance kingdom. And it's implied. You don't need to say that it's off balance. You've already said that there's only men there, right? And because of that, what has to happen in the story is those three sons are going to go looking for a woman. That's what's going to happen, because there isn't a woman there. There's no feminine. The feminine has been wiped out. And in fact, in the three feathers is a good example of this, because the king realizes he can't use anything masculine anymore, because the more that he's using masculinity, the more trouble he's getting himself into, which is why it's called the three feathers. He throws three feathers up for his sons, and his sons go in the direction the feathers fall. Basically, he's using an oracle wisdom. He's using chance. He's using the feminine in order to go forward. So right from the start, right, he's like bringing in something else. But then when they find the feminine in a story like that, it's going to come in a repressed or regressed form, because it hasn't been honored. So you would expect it to show up either as, like in that story, it shows up as a toad. She is a toad in the underworld, right? In that story. Sometimes it'll be a snake, sometimes it'll be a witch or something like that, right? It has, or some kind of malevolent force, because it's been neglected. It hasn't been invited to the party. It's eris, it's strife, it's discord, and so it's coming up in its repressed form, which is how you will find it if something has been repressed, right? This is psychological language. You can't expect to repress something, so have a world of just men, and go and find it and it's in its perfect form, like the lovely, loving thing. No. This form of the feminine will show up as repressed. And the same if you have it works the same way. You can have the mother, the queen with the three daughters. They will be looking to find a prince, but may find it in a repressed form there, like the dragon or the giant or the devil. Oftentimes it'll come like that. Any imbalance in fairy tales is addressed, actually. That's why Marie-Louise von France talks about these Chinese fairy tale tellers who could speak all day, because they basically start with an off balance, then the balance is redressed, then that becomes off balance, then the balance is redressed. And they're working between like four, then maybe one comes in, it's still out of balance, then it comes 2 and 2, but then it goes off and becomes 4 on the other side. And then you can bring it all the way back. So you can go, they can go all day, because they know what the needed element is. And there's many things to choose from to find the needed element. So the point of this, obviously, is that there's elements missing in the Pandora story, right? Like, because at the start of this story, it's a world of all men. And that world of all men is kind of like a stagnant world in my mind. The way that the poet Hesiod talks about it is like, there's no strife, there's no trouble, which is kind of funny, right? But the reason that there's no strife and trouble actually is that there's no creation. The truth of a world of all one thing, or all one side of a spectrum, is nothing's being created, because there's no polarity.
Can I jump in with something real quick?
Please jump in.
So Chris teaches as part of the astrology course that I hold. And this month we're talking about Libra. So this is making me think of what you said in the class, right? About Libra being the scales, but the scales are
Yeah,
actually not,
tipped.
yeah, they're tipped. So it's like
Mm.
we think of Libra as being about balance, but it's really maybe more about an energy of the wholeness, which contains the balancing. I don't know how you would phrase it.
That's it. That's it.
That
The balancing. So rather than this static, inanimate force called the scales that we might think of Libra as like scales,
hmm
like that. Actually, if you look at the constellation, they're always off.
hmm
And most scales drawn um in the ancient, like in the art, in the ancient arts, are off. There's some kind of understanding around the artists about this, right? Keep it off. Because the balancing is the force. That's the beauty. That's Libra, is the balancing. Not
so that
balance as though it's a thing, as though it's a stuck thing. In fact, you'll
right.
never find balance in this world. If you did find balance in this world, it would look like what Hesiod's talking about. Like, look at this world, it's only men. You could equally have said it's only women, and it's fine. Everybody's fine. Why is it fine? Because no one's aging, nothing is happening, there's no polarity, and there's no tension. That's why it's fine. But that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean it's in a world you'd like to be in. Actually, the world where it's all men, that's not a world you would actually like to be in. That's a world that would just be kind of like nothing happens on any given day. Why would anything happen?
It's kind of like if I think about the cosmos, I think about a galaxy, you think about stars. Is anything actually static in life, really? Like real natural
Right.
things?
I mean, the misnomer of all misnomers is we call them fixed stars.
Oh, and they're these like massive
Yeah,
things.
and we're just like, oh, they're fixed.
They're just a point of light. Beep.
Yeah, but of course, even that is relative because some of the stars out there that we saw or see are planets. They're not stars. So they're moving, and to distinguish between the ones that move through our night sky and the ones that do not, we call them fixed. But of course, that's a total misnomer. Those are far from fixed. We are far from fixed, right? Like our sun is obviously far from fixed as well. The whole thing is moving. And so then the beauty comes in the balancing act.
Right,
So
right.
the balancing gives gives over to suddenly, this beautiful creation. Like we're always on the cusp of some kind of rebirth, right? Another renaissance must be around the corner. But if we look through history, they're very rare, and even the Renaissance period itself is not perfect. So we
Hmm.
got to get out of like, again, like perfecting versus perfect, right? Perfect and balance, those words are dead words, right? But the verb that comes with them, to perfect, to balance, those are the beautiful parts of that. Where there's
Well,
a like looking into the world and feeling like where could there be some addressing of balance, and then that can be overwhelming because oh my God, in so many ways we would need the addressing and redressing of balance.
and again, I come back to something I often come back to with you, which is the sense of the craniosacral holding, right? Like that
Yeah.
maybe our goal, I don't know, I'm just thinking about this in this moment. Like, what is our goal really? Maybe it's individual for each of us, but do we actually want a static, perfect, balanced all the time world? Or something that my body starts to feel as you're speaking is like, well, maybe it's more that we're in a we're in a holding space that holds the totality of everything, the wholeness of everything, the body of existence, and then we are held for the actual real movement of life to do its dance, whatever that happens to be, which is not going to be static. It's like we're in the time space
No.
continuum to live, not to be
Yeah.
rigid and I don't know, a statue or something, right? So like what is our goal? Like what is it that we really actually are aiming for or wanting or wishing for?
Mm.
I don't know.
And especially when Pluto's moving into the fixed sign of Aquarius, especially fixed air, and so this is how do we address the fixedness of things, right? But I like it where we're going here, because one of the things we talk about is yeah, like the Pandora story ends up bearing a lot of fruit. It ends up being very, very important story for this time, because what happens is that Zeus, well, as we talked about, like it's all about Prometheus. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, and Epimetheus is his brother, whose name means afterthought. And so Prometheus sees the plight of the humans and steals fire to give it to the humans. He does that because the humans, they look so frail and weak, they don't have any advantages, they are going to die very quickly. And so Prometheus steals fire from the gods in order to give it to the humans, for which he is punished. The first punishment, he's put into the rocks, and he's, the griffin eats out his liver every day, or the eagle. Eternal punishment. But the other punishment, and this is again where it's like, oh, this sounds like misogyny, it sounds like it's Eve again, it's that, these kinds of things. It's like we have to be able to allow those. Yes, it sounds like that, but think of it like a fairy tale, and then you get much more juice out of it.
Or a dream.
Or a dream. Yeah. If it happens as a dream, or if it happened in fairy tale language, we can allow it to just happen and then not sort of shut it down, because the modern mind will shut it down. It's like cancel culture, but taken into the past, into the deep past, and like, well, cancel Hesiod then. It's like, okay, but you can do that, you can do it, but you lose a lot. You're the one that'll lose. Hesiod's not going to feel that. He's long gone. He's not going to be canceled, right? So I think like the part of our mind that does that, I think is part of the fixed air of Aquarius that we're actually dealing with here, to be like, stop doing that, because that's what cuts us off from our soul. And it leaves us in just the modern world, that to me is Ganymede being abducted upwards, or being abducted into the moment, or presentism, being so stuck in the present that you lose track of that there is a continuum. As you said, there's a space-time continuum, and it's addressing itself. It's addressing itself. So we can calm the ego down, right? I think one of the things the ego does is it comes in and goes like, let me reorganize this. It's like, okay, go ahead. You reorganize it, because that's just giving the actual reality is going to, let's take it back to craniosacral, right? If we get fixated, which means we want to fix what's going on in the body, then the system has to deal with another alien force coming into it, saying like, fixing it. So that is another element that needs to be healed, as in come back to the whole. The fixated, fixing element will also have to come back to some form of healing, right? Because we look at the world and we say like, here's what needs to change, here's what needs to be fixed. And I'm going to be the big heroic consciousness that does it.
Right. As opposed to, maybe you're about to say this, but just my words would be maybe as opposed to being present, listening like we would with the body, right? Like,
yeah,
instead of coming in and twisting that and whatever, we just come in and feel we're present with what's here, and we notice, oh, okay, this energy wants to move like that, and that energy wants to move like that.
yeah,
Cool. Okay, got it. So similar, maybe part of what's going on with these myths, with these stories, even our reaction to the stories in the myths is like the energy moving. Oh, okay, cool. So in this story, there's this energy of XYZ, and it wants to move like this, and then, right, and we can, instead of coming in and yanking that or that away, maybe it's more about just noticing, listening, being present.
yeah. And as you're talking about that, I'm seeing like, if we see the Pandora story, then like if we see it from a craniosacral session, it's like, oh, this is all men, so something's going to have to happen. And then if something does happen, so the mind of Zeus, which is the representative in a way of like natural sort of natural law in a sense, like, because inside of Zeus's head is Metis, who's an Oceanid. And so Zeus is himself in the Sky Father, Ocean Mother kind of condition. That's what's going on in the mind of Zeus, actually. Now, Prometheus isn't like that. Prometheus is a Titan, and Prometheus is the one that says, like, here's the issue, I'm going to fix it. Right? So Prometheus's first move is like, something's wrong with the humans. I'm going to give them fire.
And at just a point, just to throw in for people who don't know, at that point, it's all men. It's only men who have been created, right?
Yeah. Only
Okay.
men have been
There are
created.
no
So only
female.
men.
Yeah, there are only
Right.
there are no female humans yet at this moment.
Right.
Right. Okay. Keep going.
So the men are given fire from a Titan named Forethought,
Hmm.
who's thinking on his toes. He's thinking about everything, and he's the great hero. I mean, I can talk about the shadows of Prometheus, and I think it's necessary to talk about the shadows of Prometheus because Prometheus was considered in the modern day to be like this very philosophical figure. I mean, when I was at school, we had the Promethean Society, which was all about philosophy and understanding and these kinds of things. Like, it's a high ideal. So it's a bit trickstery of me to speak against Promethean energy because it's even considered to be the high ideal of Aquarius, I believe, like it's associated with the Aquarius archetype. Because it is this kind of like big, bold, radical theft from the gods to give to the humans. Like, I mean, you can see the Aquarianness in that, like, because something of the Aquarian ideal is to become the gods in a way, to elevate ourselves. That's why Ganymede is in an ascension process. He's becoming like the gods. But that is a fixated position, actually, to see that something's wrong here. I've got to do something about it. And I think that as much as I want to encourage that kind of thinking on some level to some extent, because it has its place in the world, it can also get carried away with itself. And we can start to see ourselves as one of the gods, which is hubris. But then if we bring it back to the cranial container, okay, so like if we combine this fairy tale of the three feathers with the cranial container thing that we're talking about, it's like, yes, it's all men. The men are being given fire. What would have to come through? Well, what would naturally occur is the opposite would happen. So there'd be a woman who bears with her water.
Mm.
And that water, when it comes back, remember what I said about like the fairy tale, it's going to come back in its repressed and regressed form. So what kind of form would that take as water? Chaos.
Mm.
Right? So the extreme order is going to be met with, is going to naturally come towards chaos. It's too much order, chaos will have to enter. And then as chaos begins to enter, order will become more ordered to try to push against the chaos. And there's the polarizing force.
Mm.
And as it happens in our story, Zeus effectively creates Pandora, right? Out of clay or something. What does he do?
He has Hephaestus. This is according to Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
Hephaestus create Pandora.
See, I think Aphrodite might be involved in this, though.
Then Aphrodite gives her the gifts of certain beauty or blah blah or
Oh,
something. But
okay. Okay. Right.
I don't know. So many different versions. Yeah.
So many different versions. But basically, the feminine of Pandora is created in the heavens and sent down to the earth, but she's sent down with a jar or a box. In the modern day, we've translated that to be a box, but it's quite clearly a jar. And all of the different, this is the beautiful part, I think. All the different gods and goddesses whisper into the jar something. It's a beautiful way to tell a story because it's just something you don't know,
Can
but
I
you
say
can.
before that? Before
Yes.
that, they also imbue her, Pandora, with gifts. And then her name means all gifted or all gifting. Again, according
Mm,
to Stephen Fry. But right, but that happens. Like she as the embodiment, she's the first female human being created, and the goddesses and actually some of the gods give her all the gifts. So she as a
wow.
being is actually this embodiment of giftedness and the ability to give both.
Yeah.
And then she has this jar given to her, and the same, the gods and goddesses also. Now keep going. Yes.
Okay, so that's good. So then, so that's a different twist on it then, that because that's what I've been sitting with for such a long time now, Pandora being all the gifts, but also she brings down all the curses. So then this helps me, what you just said, because then she is the embodiment of all of the gifts,
Oh,
but she brings with her all of the curses. So
fascinating.
there's your gift curse combo.
Okay.
But the curses are locked away in the jar, right? It's very tightly sealed jar. And Zeus tells her on the way down, famously, don't open the jar. Now we know that. We know that that means that's the Chekhov rifle. It's like definitely going to go off. So,
Mhm.
so anytime, any character, that's male and female, anybody told not to do something will do it.
Mhm.
So there's nothing particularly Eve-like or evil and female about this, in my mind, because that the association is, it gets put on that as the same as the biblical story of Eve, where essentially Eve is the one who eats the fruit from the tree, right? Because her curiosity gets the better of her, kind of thing. And there's insinuations around that. If we move out of that and take ourselves back to the mythic, there's nothing as curiosity provoking as the idea, don't do this. And anybody told don't do this will eventually do that in a story, because for all of us, curiosity is a strong force. And if we're here for all eternity, we will eventually do that thing, whatever the
And,
thing is we're told not to do. Yeah.
and for anybody being the one to say, like Zeus said to her, don't do this, don't open it. Well, probably what was his motivation in saying that, right? Was it
Exactly.
yes?
Yeah. So he wanted the whole thing to start up, right?
Right.
He
So
wanted the whole
Pandora
thing
gets
to start up.
blamed, but it's like, where did this start?
Yeah, and if we come back from the blame and say, well, it was a world of all of men and the feminine needed to be introduced, but the only way to introduce the feminine again is in its repressed form, and that's just
Yeah.
the way it is. That's the balancing. So then we come back to that Libra component of the balancing
Mhm.
that is going on.
Mhm.
And Pandora comes in as a balancing force, and she's the ideal balancing force in a way. She's all the gifts. She embodies all the gifts. But in order to open those gifts, you're going to have to learn to speak the feminine, right?
Mhm.
Like you're going to have to learn how to open the flower, basically. And if you can't, if you're too stuck in the masculine
Mm.
and you're too polarized and you can't do that, it will remain tightly sealed, or
Wow.
it will open up all the curses.
And just to throw in a thought arising for me with that is like, wow, what if you really do have a world that's only masculine, that's only men? How do you then learn to be the
How do you
feminine?
learn? Yes. How
Really,
would you
like the
learn?
big question, right?
Right. And then, so now we can bring in Mars and Cancer, I think, because
Go for
that would be a
it.
symbol of how one would learn.
Mm, mm, mm.
And I think, this story really does speak to our time, because we are in an extremely masculine world.
Yeah, exactly.
And this has got that sentence that I just said there has nothing to do with the dynamics between men and women. That sentence doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just like all of us, male, female, other, have been pushed into the masculine world, which means that we are like the beginnings of this story, where we are a world of all men, and it's becoming very kind of like, I don't know, it's stagnant, stale, right? Like it's not erotic. It's not actually lighting any of us up, I don't think, because we're just kind of like, it's dog eat dog out there, which is classic. Because the more that you would go into just one side, the more of its shadows you would also see. And in a sense, the shift historically between Greece and Rome is the shift between Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Ares or Mars, who was the founder of Rome. That's a very
Mhm.
significant shift. We're still trying to kind of grapple with a shift like that. Because
Yeah.
if Mars has two sons who are twins, we have the fairy tale, right? Romulus and Remus. So we have the fairy tale. And what happens from when Rome takes over up to the present day, is generally looking at that. Well, you have one male god, for instance, right? So the whole thing, the whole mythology of it is skewed. The whole mythology of it is skewed. And it's hard for us living within that because it's hard to see what myths you're living in, especially collectively.
Mhm.
So we get hints of it, but then we play it out on the wrong levels. So what we may do with that is to say, like, oh, look, the problem of this age is men. That would be the false way. That would be the mistake.
Well, again,
Because, yeah,
polarizes.
because all that's going to do is polarize. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we may come up with wacky ideas like, if we could just put women in, then everything would be sorted. Whereas it's just getting it on the wrong level. The point is not that. The point is that we've got stuck in a masculine way of perceiving the world. And so therefore we're unable to open the flowers of this world. And so therefore beauty and truth are exiled. They're going away. They're drifting away. And we're stuck with rational, logical, sensible ways, apparently sensible ways, but it's very stuck. And so what would
Yeah.
have to happen then is that Pluto, a very feminine force, would have to come into Aquarius, a very masculine force.
And I can just speak for myself, then I think a lot of us are relearning similar. Again, if you're in a world of all masculine, we're polarizing this conversation a little bit here, but whatever. Um, if that's kind of where we are, then a lot of us are relearning, me included. How do I be the feminine that is actually me? I'm right here,
Yeah.
right? But what is that? And so I'm personally in this whole relearning of what that is, who that is, because um yeah, anyway, that is a very long conversation in and of itself. Right. Okay. Yes, keep going.
And to me, the most interesting and juicy parts of the conversation now are like feminine ways of knowing, feminine ways of understanding, especially when Pluto moves into Aquarius, because Aquarius is like, the word behind Aquarius is etymology. No, not etymology, epistemology. How we know what we know, right? How do we get to know what we know? And in the ancient world, it was the oracle as the highest, which was always, oracle generally is a feminine, uh, the Pythia was a feminine seer, a female seer, who was the highest of all the knowing in the land. So that doesn't mean you just stop with that. Like, there's all this knowing too, which can be more masculine oriented, but the highest knowing in the land, the most thorough knowing, the most all-encompassing knowing, was like an oceanic knowing. It was like the seer that could just see through everything. Like, everything kind of opens to the seer, and the seer has to get that message of the oceanic into, and this is maybe why the water bearer comes from Pisces into Aquarius, moving backwards through the zodiac. How do I get all this knowing into the everyday world knowing? Very tough assignment, actually. But at least there was the understanding that oracles and signs and omens were the way to get to that knowing, because actually what we're trying to do is to get to the back to the unconscious that can filter that into the conscious. And this is what I think is being talked about here, is that there's the deep understanding, which I would call sort of the Piscean realm, and we need to bring that into the Aquarian, like the water bearer. The water comes through, right? And the
Mhm.
systems of thought and thinking and understanding are then infused with the soul. From there, truth, beauty, all the rest of it. But we've kind of already toppled the oracle, right? The highest of knowing now is rational knowing in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Science, materialist science is how we know what we know now. So we've lost the oracle way of knowing. So that is also something that sort of like comes back into like, oh, that's really lopsided. Knowing only rationally is very lopsided. I don't want to know only rationally. I want to know with my bones. I want to know with my whole soul.
So I want to circle back to Mars and Cancer because I think you were about to go down that road and I want to go down that
Yes.
road, but just staying with this for 1 second. When you're talking about this, what's coming to me is the image of the water bearer actually holding a jar.
Oh
Interesting.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what is that water that's pouring out of the jar? To me, it's the water of the divine, which is Pisces. So one way I can think of Aquarian energy maybe is actually a very sacred energetic that gives Piscean energy a, a place to flow or, like some kind of container.
Yeah.
So it's actually super integrated with Piscean energy, if I think of it like that, as opposed to what I think we experience more often is this completely disembodied, disconnected, even dissociated version of
Mm.
really out of balance Aquarius. Um, hmm,
This is great because this comes back to the fairy tale, right? Of the if we get really lopsided in our, because Aquarius is these sharp lines, right? You can see there's sharp lines and there's two of them and they're separated from each other as a glyph. So if we get stuck in that, well, just like I'm talking about with fairy tale language, when we're stuck in the world of men, Pandora would need to enter. So we've got an only fire was given. Let's say that's fire and air and the masculine principles. Let's just stretch that a little bit. So what would
yeah.
need to come through is water and earth would have to come through.
Mm,
It'd have to re-enter the world, but it'd have to come through in a repressed, regressed form,
mm, mm, mm.
which essentially Pandora is representative of that because she carries with her all the curses, and those are going to be curses when they're neglected.
Okay, so I want to throw in something here, which is, so I think, again, I'm speaking for myself, when we hear these stories where there is this repressed, especially feminine, we can get really upset. We can feel very, offended, etc. Certainly I have. And a different way of being with it for me is to, again, come back to the holding of the wholeness. And uh, I start to feel this sort of compassion, right? Like if we, just like in a dream, if we are maybe all of the characters in our dream, then we are this, what this dream is that you're describing is really a continual attempt of our own being to be in the balancing of life, right?
Hmm.
So if our being, which is the being of existence and our collective consciousness or unconscious or whatever, if that, if our being partly has this repressed feminine that needs to come back into the world somehow, she needs to be here. And
Hmm.
if our reaction is to get angry and upset because Pandora, this feminine who's finally showing up on the scene,
Yeah.
isn't perfect,
Aha.
right?
Aha.
Like, wow.
Aha.
That's actually really sad for me. As opposed to, hey, like compassion, like, whoa, okay, so we're in this learning, we're in this dance.
Yeah. Or we get angry and say, look at that. That's just another man story, another masculine story. And these kinds of things get us to that point. In which case we shut it down before the re-entry point, right? But as you say, not perfect. Yeah. She's far from perfect. because she represents a repressed energy. And so she has to come back in this form. And that's really hard psychological stuff to get our heads around. But it's the truth. It's a Jungian psychological truth. But we want instead, you know, the birth of Venus, we want Venus to come back perfect. Straight out of the ocean. Which in the end, as we have talked about, that's quite an Aquarian vision of Venus, funnily enough. So we don't want to do all of the sort of the movements through the process of bringing back feminine ways of knowing. We want to jump over all of that and bring it back as perfection.
Which is, in a sense, unattainable-ish.
Which is unattainable and puts all sorts of pressures down that obviously it can't meet. The energy can't meet because it needs to be nurtured and pulled back up. See, the feminine needs to be pulled back up from the underworld because Psyche went down there, and the masculine needs to be pulled back down from the upper world, and that's where they'll meet. That's where they'll meet. And so they both need healing, right? The masculine in this story, or in my two abductions, right? The masculine has been checked out, cut off in its thinking mind, in its upper world, and not relating at all, because it's in a dissociative state. And the feminine has been underground in the underworld, also not related, but deep in the descent, right? In the soul of things. So both need healing, both need help. And I think that's an important one to really get, that both of these sides need help. They're split off from each other and they need each other on that archetypal level for creation to happen, for beauty to come back into the world. So Mars in Cancer is quite a good symbol of that, because Mars is the masculine principle and Cancer is the mother, or the earth mother, or the wateriness, or and I want to get to that, but I also feel like there's this element where left inside Pandora's jar is hope, and I feel like I want to address that first, and then maybe from there we can move in, because that is a sign of the times. Hope and despair.
Yes, it's so good. Keep go.
Yeah, because when we look into Pluto and Aquarius, we tend to fall into one of two categories. Like the most simple thing is to fall into one of two categories. Either you think the golden age is coming and it's just around the corner, or it's going to be peace on earth, and with, you know, like, I mean, all of those things have the second coming of Christ to them and the whole lot. Like, here we go, back to paradise. That's the extreme hope. And then the extreme despair is like, wow, Pluto and Aquarius, World War III, complete chaos and destruction. The civil war in the United States. All of the very worst things that you can imagine.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately, when you look at the world, it's like, it's pretty close to that, actually. You know, as the way, you know, when we actually look into the world, it's like, a few of those things feel pretty damn close. So then we get caught in a loop of hope and despair, don't we? Like this, that is, as you said before coming on air, that's one of the ultimate polarizations, is that we get caught. Yes.
Can I just back you up a little bit to fill in the story a little bit for people?
Please.
So for people who don't know the Pandora story, so maybe you tell this story too, but I'll give the mini version.
You tell it, yeah.
Okay, so all of these gods and goddesses imbue Pandora herself with all these gifts, and then Zeus hands her this jar, says, "Don't open the jar. There's nothing in there of interest to you. Don't touch it. Don't open it. Don't worry about it. But here it is for some reason that I'm not going to tell you." Okay. So she's holding this jar. She's not allowed to open it. Eventually, she gets too curious. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is an important point here, that she buries it.
She buries it in her garden. her
So
backyard.
there's the descent, right? So
Yes.
now we can see the image from the three feathers, the image from Persephone, that the jar is buried. And that is the truth of the moment, is that the feminine, although it's shown up in the world as Pandora, the real feminine is buried,
Mm, mm.
which
Yeah.
must be the case when things have gone too far the other way.
Yeah.
It must be the case. And I think that's really, you know, if there's anything to get across, to really harp on in this in this discussion, I think, is that it's buried.
Mm.
There's a necessity for the gifts to be in their cursed form. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So, and sorry, and forgot to mention that before she's given this jar, the gods and goddesses have put into the jar something, right? And she doesn't know any of this, but we know it. So she goes and she buries this jar because she's trying to not think about it. So she wants to repress it literally in the earth, interestingly. Okay. But eventually, she can't stop thinking about it. She gets too overwhelmed by her curiosity. And so she goes and digs it up, brings it up,
Mm-hmm.
undoes the jar. And then all these flying things emerge. And at first, she's really excited. She's like, oh, that's so nice, pretty flying things. And then she realizes, oh my God, no, because one of them, I don't know, she is somehow in pain by one of them. And so she quickly puts the lid back on, seals it again. And it turns out, you go.
Well, yeah, as we know quite famously, there's one thing left in the jar, or there's a few different versions of the story, right? But one thing left in the jar is hope, and she's like clamped down,
So
which
all the
leads
things,
us,
yeah.
yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. So all the things that were released were all so before this is the Stephen Fry version at least. Before she undoes this jar, it is the golden age, the time of like perfection on this earth. Okay. And now she opens the jar, and what gets released for the very first time into the world are things what old age, alt strife, discord, eris, uh,
Yeah,
suffering of all different kinds, right?
yeah,
And then she seals the back of the jar, and the one thing that she didn't let out of the jar, not consciously, but what is sealed in there, the one thing is hope.
yeah.
What is this?
What is this
Yeah.
exactly? Yeah. Yeah, it raises a bunch of questions, actually. If you can keep talking about that for a little while, I've got a passage I might tell about this from my book.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, um, yeah, and so I'll just throw in a little bit about the astrology as you're looking for this. It's like, so one thing I'm sitting with, and one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because I'm like, well, this is so fascinating that not only is Mars going to be opposing Pluto 3 times during this time when Pluto's entering Aquarius, but so is Pandora, right? The god
Yeah.
of the underworld is going to be opposed by Pandora, who's the one who released all these things into the world, sealed back hope, and is the first female human who is also all gifted. What is she? To me, she's saying something here. So
Yeah.
this is what we're sitting with.
This is what we're sitting with. And I'll just read from this that that so this is from a book, a really good one around Greek mythology. It's kind of like a text for it's called Classical Mythology. Um, but it's Mark Morpher. It's like a text for Classics 101, basically. So details in the story of Pandora are disturbing in their tantalizing ambiguity. What is hope doing in the jar along with countless evils? If it is a good, it is a curious inclusion. If it too is an evil, why is it stopped at the rim? What then is its precise nature, whether a blessing or a curse? Is hope the one thing that enables human beings to survive the terrors of this life and inspires them with lofty ambition? Yet is it also by its very character delusive and blind, luring them on to prolong their misery? So this is a really good, these are the questions that naturally occur, but we'll put a bit of a finer point on it to um to get into that, because hope is kind of like the ultimate gift curse.
Mm.
There can be this sort of, like, it's something to really differentiate it in our own thinking, because there can be the kind of hope that in its very nature is actually despair disguised as hope.
Mm.
um and then there's the kind of hope that is that has already gone to despair. you know it's something like, if you can go to the deep depths of despair, then you see, like, something like the hope for me would be what we're talking about today, which is a grounded hope. It's more
Mm.
like a knowing that this universe here and this earth has ways of balancing itself that we cannot comprehend. And that's what I learned through 20 years of cranial sacral therapy, right? Like, in my body, there are illnesses and diseases, and that's what we would call evils, according to this kind of frame, right? And yet, already they're being worked on inside
Mm.
of my own system. And if I can make some space for that, then and maybe with the help of others, or maybe I can even learn to do it in my own soul, then I can actually assist by holding space for, much like the Chiriclo kind of way, my body to address that. But I'm not the one addressing it. I'm the one holding space for it. So I allow my ego to not get too carried away in the whole thing, right? And to actually see the hope for me is like, well, I can see a very lopsided and polarized world right now, and it's madness out there. And I don't want to kind of hope that says, like, it's not really that bad out there,
Mm.
because that's delusion. And actually that leads me to despair.
Mm.
But I can look with a sober eye at the world and say, yes, what's happening in the Middle East is terrible and terrifying, and what's happening in Ukraine is also awful. This whole thing in the United States and right now is terrifying and terrible. All the hurricanes and the natural disasters and the destruction, and real lives are getting really badly affected,
Yeah.
and traumas are coming through the world, and it's real people just like you and me that are in that. I can hold all the compassion for that without having to go blind to it all. But I can also see underneath that is an addressing, like in my own system, when there's fires and floods and famine,
Mm.
when we've been through those heightened, like, painful times, which we all do on an individual level, there is something that begins to happen to address, especially in extreme times, I think, that something happens to address it from another place. And I think Pluto is more like Pandora here. It's there's buried elements. And why people become fearful of Pluto transits, there's multiple reasons why, but it's not understanding this psychological reality. Yes, it will come back as its repressed form, but instead we think, oh, it's bad, evil, devil-like, terrible things are going to happen, as though, but that's also lopsided as an understanding of Pluto transits. It's like seeing the death of the caterpillar without any butterfly,
Mhm.
right? And yet, if we just see butterfly, we don't understand how painful it is for the caterpillar, right? So this, to me, is the hope that's left inside of Pandora's jar.
Yeah. And also, just to throw in, even when we think about the things that did fly out, all the suffering and the pain and the
Yeah,
old age, it's fascinating that that's evil. But the question also can become, well, are those entirely polarized negative things? Like, we've had this conversation before in other contexts about death, right? So there's part of what Stephen Fry talks also. There's a moment where um, the bringer of death gets, in the mythology, gets trapped or waylaid or
yeah,
something, right?
Sisyphus.
But yeah.
Yeah,
So then there's this time where there's no death. Nothing can die. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you really think that through, that sucks. It's not
yeah,
cool. That's not
yeah,
what we would actually want, right? Like,
yeah.
um,
Well, that's why how Asclepius gets punished too, because he brings someone or too many people back from the dead, and
mm,
And it's actually not Hades that punishes him, it's Zeus. Because if people are just kind of come back freely from the dead, that isn't out of balance. The balance is off. And so Zeus punishes by taking out Asclepius with a thunderbolt. That's instructive. You know, the Greeks talking about like the reality is like as much as we'd like to bring, as much as we'd like to not die, as much as we'd like to be immortals, as much as we'd like to bring back people from the dead, the results of that would be disastrous, obviously. And so they put it in mythic form. You know, they put it in mythic form just to explore it with the imagination of like, well, what is it really like? You know, this is why Sisyphus gets punished, because he chains up death.
Right.
So I feel like we've talked a lot about sort of this bringing back of the feminine, but Mars in Cancer helps us understand that also the masculine is lost, distorted, weird, off.
Yeah.
It's just that the kind of abduction that the masculine has been through, I would say, is more like Ganymede. It's been taken up into the upper world. It's been abducted upwards. So to me, the image of Mars, I mean, you know, it's a topic you and I can talk on for a long time. And actually, the design of what we're going to talk about today was this, just Mars in Cancer, but you just can't right now because there's so much context that needs to be brought in first through everything that we've been talking about before we can even get there, I think. So I think it's kind of perfectly.
We were just so people know, we were originally going to do Mars and Cancer, and then we were like, well, maybe later we could do something about Pluto and Pandora, something. And now it's like, wait a minute, actually, no, that's not going to work very well.
It's not going to
Maybe
work
we could
very
do
well.
another video later where we really go into Mars. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. But anyway, yeah, keep going.
So to me, Cancer is the sign that represents it. You know, where is the crab? The crab is moving in between the sea and the sand, the earth and the water, and so therefore it's the known world and the unknown world, or it's the world as we understand it now and everything that's been lost, because things get lost in the ocean, you know. So what the Cancerian soul is here to do is go back to the ocean and can come back to the land, which can get the Cancerian soul lost in the ocean or into the swings of moods or into the oceanic or into the lostness and confusion of the ocean. But ultimately, that's just one expression of what it's trying to do, which is go back and find lost things. So then Mars in Cancer must be trying to find lost things that pertain to what it is to be, what the masculine actually is, including what it is to be a man, inclusive of that, I believe.
Yeah.
And so now it brings me to another mythology or another mythological analogy, which is the labyrinth. And Theseus is the great hero who walks into the labyrinth with the help of Ariadne's thread. And because he has the thread, he can make his way into the labyrinth and face the Minotaur, which is the bull man. There's a lot of things in that one little thing that I've just said, because firstly, I think what's important about having the thread is if you've gone a long way the wrong way, which obviously with the Mars principle in the world, we can see, yep, that's true. Instead of keep going in that direction, which would be really foolish because you already know you're on the wrong track, we would have to feel the thread and go back. And that's very Cancerian. Feel the thread, go back to where we last made the wrong decision, make a different decision. But if I continue on this way or even try to choose other directions over here, it's not going to work because I haven't gone back yet. I haven't gone back to where I made the wrong decision in the first place. And just that one image, I think, can be very, very useful, because where we get ourselves tangled in the thread is that we're just turning round and round and going like, why? I've just gone another, 50 meters through the labyrinth and it's still not okay. It's like, yeah, because you're in progress and not regress. You actually have to come back to a place where it made sense again, and then come forward from there. So if you look at what happens in the polarization in the United States, in your world, but it's our world, it's all of our world, because we're all in that myth, right? It may be happening over there, but it's all in our myth. As always, the Democrats are about progress and the Republicans are about regress. It's just different ways of happening, right? Like, so make America great again is supposing that we can go back and it'll be great. And progress would suppose that we can go forward and it'll be great. They're both wrong, actually, and they're both right, as it tends to happen. There has to be a sense of a regress so that we can make better decisions going forward, right? But where it gets confused is that there's this way that you can just go back and back and back, and you get to like the fantasy place where it was actually great when it's not, right? Actually, it's like we've made some wrong turns here. That has to be acknowledged. So in the soul, and especially the soul of the masculine, it's like, yeah, got to reckon with that. And which means we've got to go to an energy that we're not used to using, which is regress rather than progress, which is true. But that does not mean to establish an old world like a 50s or something like that. You know, there's nothing to re-establish. It's just something to go back to and say, like, there was a wrong turn made around this principle. And then what is that turn and what are we trying to do? Well, look at the actual myth again, as we were talking about before getting on air. The thing about the Minotaur that makes it monstrous is it's this animal side that's on top and his human side that's on bottom. Whereas classically hybrids will be animal on the bottom and human on the top. So like Pan is way more animal at his feet, and the higher that you go up is more human, right? Even though he does have the horns. And the Centaur is even more so, where it's fully horse on the bottom and fully human at the top. That's kind of the natural way of things. And these hybrid creatures give us images of integration, actually, between our animal side and our human side. They give us also a lot more about like the immortal part and the mortal part. Like, it gives us images to work with, and we need those images. Otherwise, it's more and more polarization because we have no images that can represent an actual integrated part. And I think for the masculine in particular, there'll be a different version of this for the feminine, but for the masculine, or Mars, as we're talking about here, the ultimate image for me of healthy masculine, we talked about it before, is Pan. And why is Pan such a great image for it? Because he's fully integrated his animal, which means that his animal is fully alive, but he's not a slave to it.
And Earth, right?
And earth and earthiness, right? So he's goat. So he's got this Capricorn and Capricornness integrated into himself. So, which means that he can hold wisdom. Yeah, go on.
Well, just to throw in again, astrologically, the reason we originally started talking about this before doing this video is that I've been thinking a lot about the fact that as Pluto goes into the seasonal sign of Aquarius, it's also entering the constellation of Capricorn, or you could call it the sea goat, which is associated with Pan. So there's some overlay there that you could really feel into it as Pluto entering Aquarius and the sign associated with Pan.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating to me.
And I mean, imagine that. Like, let's let our imaginations go with that, because this is why I have to speak against the progress thing, because progress can be you know, look at what happens with corporations now. They're just so good at the greenwashing and the PR sort of thing, right? Because it's like, look, we'll make progress. We'll actually, you know, what did I see the other day? It's like a hotel that says we want to do our bit for sustaining the earth. It's like, oh, do you? That's interesting, because all I see is like 1,000 AC units. But we're not going to wash your towels because we want to make the world better. It's like, you know what? I don't want to be fallen for that anymore. Like that's not it, right? That's not it. And so instead of that, we can dream into like what it might be to integrate the earth again.
Mm.
And in order to do that, we may have to come off the high horse and into our soulful, like what does it actually mean to be animal?
Mm.
Because I think a lot of progress in this world has been made of escaping animal. That's why there's this kind of thing of the primitive way of seeing the world. Actually, the primitive way of seeing the world is really what we need to bring back. Because how are we going to work with all of this? We're just going to put on layers and layers more human stuff, more kind of like consciousness, and lose again and again the unconscious, which is where all the wisdom is. The only way really to bring in upon true healing in this world is to bring back the unconscious world, which is why I keep going back to the Pythia oracles, other ways of knowing, other ways of seeing, and holding that back to where it was, which was not like, well, here's the masculine way of knowing, and yeah, there's also there's this oracle thing. It's like, no, the oracle's on top.
Mm.
The oracle is the top of the pinnacle. That is the best knowledge, the most clean knowledge you can ever get, is somebody that is who has become fully earth and can tell you from earth what needs to happen.
Mm.
And until we bring back that form of knowledge, and then this system underneath there, which is the Aquarian system, can then go about making that happen in the world. But it has to defer back to this level of knowing.
Whoa. I think we need a whole, seriously, I think we need a whole conversation just about that. Seriously.
Yeah, I think so.
Like big time.
Yes.
I know we just have a few more minutes. Can I bring in one little thing that I'm thinking of as you're saying that? Maybe we bring it to
Yeah.
a close.
Yeah.
So, because seriously, I really that you just said, I needed a whole thing just on that. Okay, but when you're talking about this regression and the Cancerian thing, what it brings up for me is something that we've talked about at some point, somewhere. I think I've definitely talked about it in some of my videos somewhere. When I was a therapist, I worked with kids in the foster care system, right? So I used to work with kids who were extremely traumatized, et cetera, and they're in a foster home, and now they're being parented by someone else. Okay, someone other than their original parent, and the really common pattern that would happen over and over and over again is that I would actually want to see and I would want to look for is if the parent was doing a really good job, eventually I would get a call from them saying, oh no, what's happening? So and so, who's 7 years old or 8 years old or 10 years old, is starting to talk in baby talk. What's wrong? Oh no, blah blah blah. And I would say, no, actually, that's excellent. That's exactly what we want to happen, because what needed to happen, because I was a psychotherapist at that time, but I also had this background and training in craniosacral therapy. So I couldn't overtly tell them about the craniosacral part because that wasn't my job at that moment. But I knew in myself, okay, what's going on for them in their physiological being and their energy body being is what they need to be doing is actually going back to the beginning, right? They need to be basically inside the shell, regressing all the way back. You want them to go all the way back to conception energetically, in a sense, right? So then they can go all the way back, and then they hit this point where you could almost feel it. Like I could almost hear it when it would happen with these kids. It would go beep. And then they would start to come back out of the shell, and then there'd be this huge transformation, right? And again,
Yeah.
if they're being parented in a really consistent way, that would happen over and over and over and over and over again. So I'd get super excited when they were actually starting to regress. But the key that I wanted to bring in is it wasn't like, let's say they're 7 years old. I didn't want them to regress to 3 and stop. I wanted them to regress all the way back to the very beginning. That's where their nervous system and their body needed to go, was all the way back to before they were ever traumatized, right? And then they could literally, like a that beep thing could happen in them, and then they could start over, and then their nervous system would be able to rewire, and then they could heal.
Mm.
So, not that it would erase all that trauma, it doesn't, but you get what I'm saying, right? So even when I'm thinking about this, it's not even that we want to regress a little bit, like go back to the 1950s and stop. Like you're saying, no, there, where I go in me, this could just be me, but where I actually go on, if I'm being really honest, is I go back to the beginning of time. When
Yeah.
you're talking and I'm feeling into it, I go all the way back to the moment I remember of myself being the drop coming out of source, where I split into feminine and masculine.
Mm.
And
Which happens to be which means mythologically we have to go back to creation myths, and then funnily
wow.
enough, we're in one. Pandora is a creation myth.
Yes. Wow.
Because
Right,
we have to
exactly.
return to creation myths. Now, then as an invitation for whoever's watching and listening, like, do that. What's the creation myth that really pulls to you? Look around. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be the one that we're in today. It could be any creation myth. It could be
mm,
Navajo kind of, like there's so many beautiful ones around the world, but that every alive cosmology has a creation myth. Even science has one that's called the Big Bang. There's not a whole lot
yeah.
of characters in it, not a whole lot goes on. You can't learn too much from it, but you can still come back to a time before a bang, and then see like what's it like to be in that space, that wide
Yeah.
open space before a bang. I mean, it's very basic. This is why you can see that regression's already happened. Cosmology has regressed. But also you can come back to your own conception, or you can come back to, if you're in a relationship that's gone all haywire, you can return back to your origin myth. The question
Mm,
to ask, this is in process-oriented psychotherapy, the question to ask is, how did you meet? So if someone asks you, how did you meet? It takes you back to the moment that you met, which takes you back to your origin story. That's
yeah.
creation myths. And creation myths are very, very valuable for the psyche for exactly what you're saying, because it allows us to come back to like, oh, that's right. There was all this. And then we go back through the labyrinth again, and we have more like, oh, okay, I've already been around a few of these. I don't need to make these same turns. Relationships can heal like that. Souls can heal like that. We're all split multiple times, and we can all come back through that. And that is the symbol of Aquarius, because the water comes back through the system, right? The healing wholeness of water comes back through the system, and we feel, okay, now where are we at? We're not going to come to a place where the world is suddenly perfect, but we can come to a place where enough individuals look at the world and say, I know exactly how this is broken.
Mm,
I know exactly where not exactly, but I can feel where we went wrong. And I know that we need different ways of organization, different ways of eating, different ways of healing, different ways of educating. Like every system in this world is broken to a large extent now, but that's an opportunity. That's the grand opportunity of our time. If we really want to pass forward, as humans have always wanted to do, pass the next generation something beautiful, something more beautiful than what we were handed, which is a achievable goal, not a lofty goal, right? Then we will need to look at all the systems in the next 20 years while Pluto is in Aquarius, look at all the systems and essentially deconstruct, reconstruct. But it's not deconstruct just to keep deconstructing it into its nihilistic roots, right? No, that's not what it is. It's deconstruct so that we can reconstruct. There's so much better. We can do so much better with things like education, with things like health, with things like food, just to name a few, right? Government, elections. We can do way better than this, way better. And we all know it. And it's just being shown to us that, well, look, this is really broken. And that's not wrong.
can I add in one
Yes.
last thing? So,
Yes.
yeah, okay. So again, I'm sitting back. Where am I taken into the beginning? It's the beginning of time as me. So again, it's like I go back to this moment. I come out of source as a drop. I split into the feminine and the masculine. And when I go back to that place in me, again, I come back to my wholeness, right? So it's again, it's the craniosacral holding of the balancing of Libra as opposed to the balance static thing. It's the, so, and what I feel when I go back to that part of me is the totality of who I am as those polarities as one, and the unbelievably powerful love between the two of them. Right. And so when I'm sitting with the totality of these massive issues that are going on our planet, I can feel in myself how if I were to operate in my own being in a polarized, out of balance way, like the two parts of me fighting each other, I can't actually hold space for anything in the world in an effective, truly helpful way. So instead, if I come back to that original, I regress all the way back to the beginning of time, and I am really present with that unbelievable, powerful love between my two selves, if you could say it like that, then what I feel is just compassion for everything, not whatever, for life, and I can meet and see and be present with the brokenness of the world in such a different way. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it makes me think like these two parts, they hate each other because they love each other so much. The longing for each other is so intense, the absence of the other is so intense that it turns into hate, you know, and it turns into this fear, and it turns into this disconnect. But actually that's all just a product of the love that they feel for each other, because ultimately they would like to heal that and come back.
Or in my case, it's not so much, I haven't really felt hate between them. It's more like I forgot.
Yeah, but that can express in the world through hate,
in the
right?
world. Yeah. Right,
Of the
exactly.
opposite.
Yeah.
That's why this word repair is a beautiful word.
Yes.
To put the pair, to repair, right? To repair the opposites, pair them again.
Yeah. And again, to not bring it to like this weird perfection that where they both have to be perfect and they both have to be XYZ. But no, it's more like, for me, it's about holding the totality that we can be in this out of balance dance still, that we have compassion for the reality that we are in a world that's hurting. Like we are, that is true. It's just true, right? And then again, that hope, grounded hope, you know, that we can be with the dance of life in a way that is present with that love, that powerful love, and the real, actual healing presence.
Yeah. That's it. I'll just say again and again, I feel despite all of the madness in the world, it's an amazing time to be alive.
Totally. We're here for a reason.
Yeah.
Our souls didn't do this for no reason. That's my very strong opinion.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that feels complete to me. Does it feel complete to you?
It does. Right
Awesome.
on time.
Good. Okay. So just to say for everybody again, if you resonated with this, if you're here with us at the end of this video, you probably resonated in some way. I highly recommend Chris's podcast, On the Soul's Terms. So good. Go and watch the one that he did in Greece recently. That's my favorite so far. They're all amazing, but your Hercules series is so beautiful, and that's what you're working on right now. And yeah. They're all great. Wonderful. Okay. We'll be back. We'll be doing more stuff next year. We're going to be doing a star course, and more to come on that. So
more to come. Amazing.
Yay.
Thank you, Martha. Amazing discussion,
thank you
as always.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, we would love your thoughts. See you soon.
Yes, please. See you.